Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is September the 12th, 2024. It has been 3,881 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 204 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 201 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 38 days since Ukraine counterinvaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened from Wednesday to Thursday morning. You will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. There is a link in the podcast description, and there are map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine war report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south, and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission: the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. It's unchanged from yesterday, so if you want to skip ahead, I won't mind. I won't even know. 1. The lack of a meaningful response by Ukraine's allies to open and unrestricted attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure by Russia has convinced Moscow this is an effective strategy with no political consequences. 2. Russia will maintain its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. 3. Continued attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have caused critical damage, creating an environment where an accident at one or more of Ukraine's nuclear power plants is possible. 4. The unwillingness of the Biden administration to permit Ukraine to use provided weapons for strikes more than 40 kilometers from the 1991 state border with Russia has forced Ukraine to develop its own deep strike capabilities, proving that escalation threats from Moscow are hollow. 5. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States, and to a small extent Germany, is a complete failure that only encourages Russian acts of aggression, including more frequent and deeper violations of NATO alliance airspace and acts of espionage in Europe and North America. 6. We maintain that the failed policies of the NATO alliance are increasing the probability of a significant international incident, nuclear proliferation, and an expansion of the Russia-Ukraine war into the European continent. 7. Despite Russia's localized counteroffensive, Moscow has no strategic reserve available, continues to suffer unsustainable losses, and has committed almost all of its available conventional forces in Ukraine. 8. We maintain the Kursk counter-invasion is strategically sound. 9. Autocrat Vladimir Putin's order to recapture the Kursk region of Russia by October the 1st is unrealistic and unlikely. 10. The Russian economy is much weaker than reported. 11. Persistent delays in the delivery of promised military hardware, munitions and funding continue to prevent the Ukrainian armed forces from reaching their full combat potential. 12. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. Yesterday, Russia launched 64 Shahed-136 one-way drones, a Kh-59 guided air-to-surface missile, and 2 Kh-22 supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles at Ukraine. Air defenses shot down 44 Shaheds, with 7 more deflected by electronic warfare. At the time the script was written, air defense units were still tracking 4 Shaheds. Yesterday's attacks damaged energy infrastructure in the Donetsk, Poltava, Sumy and Kharkiv oblasts. In the Zaporizhia and Khmelnytsky oblasts, due to instability in the electrical grid, electrical substations were de-energized to prevent damage. A Russian missile struck the Kamyansk district in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, killing a 38-year-old man and hospitalizing 3, one with serious burns and 2 more with blast injuries. In the Chernihiv Oblast, Russian forces shelled the hospital in Semenivka, blowing out windows and knocking out power to parts of the facility. No patients or staff members were injured. On Wednesday, Russia carried out 105 discrete assaults, and through September the 11th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks dropped to 160. It was the smallest number of assaults since Ukraine started the Kursk counter-invasion. In the Kursk region, Ukraine controls 1,158 square kilometers, with another 440 in the Grey Zone, for a total area of 1,598 square kilometers. The bridge is 95 kilometers wide, with a depth of up to 33 kilometers. Ukraine controls 93 hamlets, villages, settlements and tactically significant areas, such as the Gazprom gas compressor and metering station at Sudzha. Of those, 33 settlements are under full administrative control. The Glushkovsky salient, where 2,500 to 3,000 Russian troops are isolated, is 463.5 square kilometers. It's been a while since our analysts could prepare an analysis of the day. Today, they wanted to address the sharp decline in the number of Russian attacks. There have been increasing complaints from Russian units of wounded troops being forcibly returned to combat duty, including those with mobility issues, and combat-destroyed units sent on new assaults. While these complaints have continued since 2022, there has been a notable increase in the last 2 to 3 weeks. The number of armored vehicle losses for Russia has declined since August, as offensive operations increasingly depend on light infantry using improvised mobility solutions such as scooters, motorcycles, ATVs and total tanks, while the number of artillery systems lost has increased. And while Russia has received millions of tubed and barrel artillery rounds and powder charges from North Korea, the number of rounds used per day is a fraction of what it was 2 years ago. We lost critical data when Kyiv stopped reporting the number of Russian fire missions and airstrikes. That information would have provided more insight on whether Russia's combat potential is starting to decline. There is not enough evidence to declare that the Russian offensive is starting to culminate. Russian troops are still advancing in Ukraine, and we have observed 2 operational pauses this summer, the first in early June and the second in early August. One thing is clear, the unprecedented operational tempo of the last 24 days was unsustainable. Let's go into the details of what happened on the battlefield. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in northeastern Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. We begin in the Kursk region of Russia, in the Glushkovsky area of operation, or AO, which is shrouded in the fog of war. Starting with what we do know, a first-person view one-way drone destroyed construction equipment in an attack on Russian combat engineers trying to make a temporary repair on the same river bridge north of Zvana. Russian and Ukrainian sources made many claims about a Ukrainian counteroffensive on the west flank of the Russian counteroffensive in the Korenevo AO. Russian sources claimed without evidence that up to 2 companies of Ukrainian mechanized armor reached Volfina and Novy Put, but were forced to withdraw. Russian mercenary Melblogovo Gonzo reported Ukrainian armor and demining equipment reached Medvezhye and Politodelsky, while Melblogo 2 majors claimed Ukrainian forces attempted to advance from Obody in Ukraine. Two majors denied that Ukrainian forces were able to enter the area despite the pictures shared by Gonzo. There was significant cloud cover over the Kursk region, but NASA Fire Information for Resource Management Systems showed potential fires between Medvezhye and Politodelsky. Based on the available intelligence, we moved both villages and Sergeyevka into the grey area. East of Politodelsky, Ukrainian forces were visually confirmed south of the Church of the Entry of the Blessed Virgin Mary into the temple in northern Kulbaki, suggesting an advance from Troitskaya or the forested region southwest of Apanasovka. Although we have low to moderate confidence in most of the claims made, based on the Russian and Ukrainian reports, geolocation, satellite images from September the 10th, and NASA firms, we expanded the grey area further north and west in the Glushkovsky AO to the second echelon of the Prigozhin line to the village of Sadovое Tovarishchestvo Glushkovo. Additionally, there continued to be reports without evidence of fighting in the area of Yelizavetovka. In the Korenevo AO, multiple Russian mail bloggers worked to reset expectations about the ongoing counteroffensive, while the Russian Ministry of Defense, or Armored, undercut claims of success made on September the 10th. Speaking with Russian state media agency TASS, Chechen Akhmat commander Major General Aptia Laudinov claimed, without evidence, that 10 villages and settlements were captured. More on that in a minute. Armored reported fighting continued in the area of Apanasovka and that the VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, and Russian ground units carried out airstrikes and artillery shelling on Uspenovka, Byakhovo, Vishnyovka, Snagost, Obuchovka, and Lyubimovka. The official report from the Kremlin doesn't support a claim made by Russian state media agency MASH that Russian troops reoccupied 150 square kilometers of territory. A new Russian video of an airstrike was geolocated in Snagost, indicating Ukrainian forces still control the western half of the settlement, and two majors reported fighting continued. The VKS also bombed Obuchovka. A drone video showed 3 Russian armored vehicles withdrawing from the forested area northwest of Lyubimovka and then turning north toward Korenevo. This aligns with a report by Rybar, who wrote, quote, "Russian paratroopers have expanded their zone of control in the direction of Lyubimovka and occupied part of the forest." Rybar also all but rejected claims that Russian forces reached Obuchovka, declaring, quote, "Despite statements about the capture of the settlement, several sources reported strikes on the village. However, this could have been archival footage of the beginning of the counteroffensive." Gonzo also advised caution, writing, quote, "There is progress, but statements about the liberation of certain settlements require confirmation." We expanded the grey area west along a line from Apanasovka to Gordeevka. Based on the geolocated video of the Russian armor withdrawing from the Lyubimovka direction and Rybar's report, we expanded the area of Russian control north of Snagost and moved the grey area to the western edge of Lyubimovka. Ukrainian drones attacked Russian positions in Korenevo village, and a Ukrainian infantry mobility vehicle was destroyed west of Zhebalovka on the road to Vetrina. Moving to assessment. There is not enough information to determine the scale of the Russian counteroffensive or its initial success. We are shocked that some Ukrainian sources appear to have taken the claims made by Major General Laudinov at face value, given his documented history of false claims. The current evidence only shows a localized offensive involving 3 platoons of Russian mechanized infantry that made significant tactical gains. The lack of pictures or videos showing Russian flag raisings in any of the areas reportedly captured, and the change in the tone from the Russian mail blogger community suggests that advances were more limited than first reported. It is abundantly clear that had Ukrainian forces maintained control of Korenevo village, the September the 10th Russian counteroffensive would not have been possible. We acknowledge that several credible Ukrainian sources have issued grim assessments of Russian advances. Some of those sources also appear to be resetting expectations, declaring that Ukrainian forces were pushing Russian troops back. We remain dedicated to our editorial policy of being right over first. Pictures or information from 3 independent sources, or it didn't happen. In the Lgov operational direction, a Ukrainian armored vehicle was destroyed east of Sheptuhovka in the area between the settlement and Semyonovka and Shapashnikova. That's the same area I told you about yesterday that satellite images showed renewed fighting. A Russian source claimed that Ukrainian forces were advancing in the direction of Kromsky Byki, which is the first acknowledgement of the advances we've been observing for the last 11 days. Armad reported that Orlovka, Novaya Sorochina, and Malaya Loknya were shelled. In the Sumy Oblast of Ukraine, Russian Shahed 136 one-way drones targeted the city of Konotop, over 100 kilometers away from the fighting in the Kursk Oblast of Russia. The trolley system, apartment buildings, a medical facility, a school, retail shops, and critical electrical infrastructure were hit, wounding 14 civilians. Part of the trolley network is offline, and power and water are out in most of the city. Emergency generators were being used to provide technical water for firefighters. Russian drone attacks in the border region wounded 2 more civilians. An FPV one-way drone struck a bread truck near Myropilya, wounding the driver, and a civilian was injured near Krasnopilya.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
It's time to talk about my home, Ukraine. We start in the Kharkiv Oblast in the Liptsi-Vovchansk AO. Russian assaults were repulsed northeast of Liptsi, in the area of Gatishche, and northwest of Tykhe. Positional fighting continued in Vovchansk, with no change in the situation. In the Kupiansk AO, fighting continued in the southern part of Sinkivka. A Dragon drone attacked Russian positions northwest of Peshchane, showing Russian troops were further north than previously assessed, and the map was adjusted. Russian attempts to advance west in the direction of Glushkovo were unsuccessful. Russian troops also continued their attempts to advance toward Lozova from occupied Novoselivsk. Southwest of Novoselivsk, Russian troops occupying a tree line on our current line of conflict were attacked by a Dragon drone. Multiple Russian mail bloggers declared the drone attack as proof of a new Russian advance, but we geolocated Russian troops in the same tree line several weeks ago. In the Luhansk Oblast, west of occupied Svatove, fighting restarted in the southern part of Stelmachivka. Russian attempts to advance from occupied Sergiyevka and in the direction of Druzhelyubivka ended in failure. West of Kremenna, fighting continued in Makiyivka, and Russian forces tried to advance in the direction of Grekivka, Nevske, and Terny. Russian troops tried to retake lost positions near occupied Dibrova, suffered losses, and retreated to the village. Moving on to the Donbass, where we start in the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. Beginning in the Siversk AO, Russian forces entered another operational pause, only carrying out a single attack southeast of Vyemka. In the Kostiantynivka AO, fighting continued along the Siversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal in Kalynivka and the western edges of the canal district of Chasiv Yar. A single Russian soldier was attacked by a drone in Klishchiivka, confirming the existing line of conflict. In the Toretsk-New York AO, Russian forces made new advances. A Russian position 500 meters northwest of the penal colony in Toretsk was attacked by Ukraine, showing a new advance on Dzerzhinsky Street. Russian forces continued their attempts to bypass Ukrainian defenses by trying to advance in the direction of Dachne. Fighting also continued southwest of Zalizne, with Russian troops trying to advance into Nelipivka. In southwestern Donetsk Oblast, more than half of today's Russian attacks occurred in the Pokrovsk and Kurakhove areas. Ukrainian forces continued to hold the northern flank, repulsing attacks in the direction of Zelenopole, Vozdvizhenka, Myrolubivka and Krasny Yar, and in Hrodivka and Novogrodivka. The VKS destroyed the bridge that crossed over the railroad tracks between Mirnograd and Pokrovsk, collapsing one section. In separate attacks, Russian forces destroyed the water treatment plant and the gas distribution plant in Pokrovsk, cutting off water, sewer and natural gas services in Pokrovsk. The head of the Donetsk Oblast military administration, Vadim Filashkin, said, quote, "The situation is extremely difficult and will not get better in the near future." Russian sources reported fighting continued in Marinivka, countering Ukrainian claims the village was captured. Based on the new geolocated intelligence, we adjusted the map and coded Marinivka as contested. Fighting continued in Mikhailivka, with no significant change to the situation. In the Kurakhove area, there was some clarity on the situation. Multiple sources reported the Russian flag raising in Lysivka that we covered in the September 9th situation report. We're unsure why the video recirculated. Ukrainian humanitarian aid volunteers Danilo Zakharchenko and Oleksandr Gumenyuk encountered a single Russian soldier in Ukrainsk while evacuating civilians. There was the sound of almost continuous small arms gunfire nearby as the Russian soldier approached the group. After a brief tense exchange, the Russian soldier told the group to leave. A second video showed a dead Russian soldier near the same area. We'll link to both videos in today's situation report, and the video with the aid workers and the Russian soldier has English subtitles. There is more information on how to access the videos I mentioned in the podcast description. Based on the new intelligence, the map was adjusted to show fighting in the southern part of the settlement. Fighting continued in the northwestern panhandle of Krasnohorivka, but this was likely rearguard action by Ukrainian forces completing their withdrawal. Fighting continued in western Georgiivka, and Russian sources claimed that Kostiantynivka had been captured. In the Vuhledar area, Russian sources reported fighting continued at the Pivdенно-Donbaska coal mine number 1. Ukrainian Special Operation Forces carried out an operation at one of the Boyka towers in the Black Sea. During the raid, a reconnaissance drone assisted in targeting a Russian Su-30 multi-role fighter plane, which was shot down with a manpad. Russian sources confirmed the loss of the airframe and both crew members. Armod claimed that the Ukrainian raid was a failure and the Ukrainian unit was eliminated. If that were true, we wouldn't be sharing the video of a Su-30 being shot down. Take all the time you need. Members of the Ukrainian garrison occupying Zmiyny, also known as Snake Island, off the coast of Odessa, shared a brief video confirming the continued Ukrainian presence. Airports were closed in the Murmansk Oblast due to the threat of the drone strikes. Russian sources reported explosions near Alenia military airfield, where Russia bases part of its Tu-95 MS strategic bomber fleet. In breaking news, one of the largest buildings at the Omsk Transmash complex in Omsk was on fire. The facility is 2,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border and refurbishes tanks and builds the TOS-1A Solntsepek multiple launch rocket system. Ukrainian special forces sabotaged the railroad tracks in Stary Oskol in the Belgorod region, derailing a train carrying military supplies. After all the speculation, United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken told reporters that he would report back to Washington with the information provided on why Ukraine needs to do deep strikes on Russia. Rumors were rampant in the information space, ranging from the United Kingdom had authorized the use of Storm Shadow missiles to no decision would be made before September the 24th. When President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to meet with his US counterpart Joe Biden at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Speaking with reporters after Wednesday's meeting with Blinken and the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom, David Lammy, Zelensky said that a positive outcome, quote, doesn't depend on my optimism, it depends on their optimism. Secretary Blinken announced a $700 million aid package for Ukraine during his visit. It includes $325 million to help repair Ukraine's electrical grid, $290 million in humanitarian aid for displaced citizens, and $102 million for the clearing of landmines and unexploded ordnance. Secretary Lammy announced a $783 million aid package to Ukraine, including $299 million to stabilize the electrical grid and humanitarian aid, and $484 million in military assistance. Latvian Prime Minister Avi Kasiliņa announced a new military aid package for Ukraine that includes armored personnel carriers and drones. Kasiliņa also announced that Latvia would equip and train several thousand Ukrainian soldiers in 2025. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda announced that he had signed a memorandum of cooperation on defense technology and development with Ukraine at the Defense Industry Forum in Kyiv. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.